Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Multifamily Man podcast, powered by Total Wealth Academy. I'm your host, Angelo Webb, and today we will be talking about fair housing. Fair housing is something that is very, very delicate, necessary, very necessary, but delicate. I'm actually going to make this into like a series, maybe break it down like 4 or 5. Because it's based off of 6 or 7 different things, even more depending on the state that you're in. So this is something that gets very detailed. People in the multifamily industry have to recertify every year through. There's different companies, but Grace Hill I think is the most popular and widely used. So you have to take these every year, just to show and prove that you understand fair housing, what it entails, what's allowed and what's not allowed. And then another reason you have to do it every year is because things change, right? Federally, things can change. Statewide, things can change. Locally, things can change. And keep in mind, anybody that follows my mentor and the leader here at Total Wealth Academy will know that Steve always talks about, to avoid fair housing, don't be a racist asshole, right? That's his quote. That's his quote. And generally, when he's speaking about single family homes. We're geared towards multifamily. And the rules are actually very different once you hit multifamily. Don't be a racist asshole still applies. But it's things that are a lot deeper than that. For example, if somebody comes in and you ask them, and they mention they have kids, or you ask them what's the age of their kids, you just violated fair housing. So that's just a small example, but I'm going to go much more in detail. But the big thing, fair housing equals non-discriminatory housing. That's all it means, and that's all that these laws that are in place, they're designed just to make sure that people are not discriminated against. Now, we all have a right to live wherever we can afford to live. So that's the big thing. The big thing is to make sure that if somebody financially can afford to rent somewhere, this does also include buying homes, because real estate agents also have obligation to adhere to fair housing as well as mortgage brokers. But again, we're gearing this towards multifamily. Step back. Mortgage brokers, real estate agents, they all have to adhere to fair housing as well, but it works a little bit different. But the most important thing is again, this is to protect people, because we've had groups of people throughout our country's history who've been discriminated against somewhere they can and can't live. And this is just to do away with those things and, make sure that people have an affordable place to live. Not affordable, but, they can live wherever they can afford to live, right? And they're not excluded from a property or a neighborhood or a city for any other reason, right? So the word discriminate. So if you look it up in the dictionary, the first definition is to make a distinction amongst historical sources, right? The second one is what this applies more to, is to make a difference in treatment or favor on a basis other than individual merit, right? So again, what that means is you're judging somebody off something general, right? You look at them and make this general assumption. So you're discriminating. Like, that's discrimination. Discriminating against a certain nationality, discriminating against a certain religion, gender, etc. Okay, so why fair housing? Because it's the right thing to do, right? Like we live in a country that prides itself on being free, um, and we are, I believe we are, but because it's the right thing to do, right? So, in a place where we're free, we should be free to live wherever we can afford to, right? So that's one of the big reasons. And another reason to adhere to fair housing is it's required by the law. State and federally is required for you to do these things. Um, and a lot of people don't understand the consequences when you are not in compliance or when you are found to break fair housing rules and regulations. The monetary damages can be astounding. Um, they can get you the person who did it, like if there's a leasing agent, they can get the management company and they can get the owner. So that's three levels of people who can be sued, right? Um, Loss of your reputation. I mean, again, another reason why you should adhere to it, loss of your reputation. Like you don't want to be that investor. You don't want to be that property. You don't want to be that owner that's known for discriminating against certain groups of people, right? Because at the end of the day, your reputation is everything. If you don't have, if you only have one thing, I think your reputation is more valuable than anything. And then also, I mean, you could lose your property. You could lose your property for discriminating. If they get enough occurrences, they can come in and take someone's property or force them to sell if it's a repeat action. So it's very important, again, even if you are a sexist asshole or a racist asshole, whatever. At the end of the day, I'm sure you like money, right? So at the very least, even if you are heartless, for the sake of protecting your investment, make sure you're adhering. That's why it's important to adhere. Relevant laws. So we have the Fair Housing Act. Really, the Fair Housing Act is the big one. You can go to different states and they have different, like California has the Fair Employment and Housing Act, right? So you can go to different states and they might have something in additional to the Fair Housing Act. But the Fair Housing Act is federal. So for any of us that don't remember, when they pass something federally, it applies to all of our states. And then the states can actually enact something that is more intense, right? So like the feds might say, yeah, you can't discriminate against somebody based off their race. Then you might have other states that say, well, you also can't discriminate on their sexual preference or their religion, right? So they can go a step further. States can add on top of it, but they have to adhere to that minimum, right? In the Fair Housing Act, sets the precedent for what we do across the country. Okay. So the biggest thing is people have to understand that we're all protected and we're all covered by fair housing. So it does not matter what color you are. It does not matter nationality. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. We're all protected. If you're listening, you're protected. Everybody that you go out today and you look at them, they're protected, right? These classes, it's called protected classes. We all fall into one or several of them. And really kind of technically, we all fall into all of them. But we are all protected. Like I said, everybody is a member of like multiple protected classes. You'll never just be one, if that makes sense. Okay. So prohibited bases. So these are the things that you cannot deny someone housing for. Okay. And this is a long list. as you can see, like I said, this is very intensive. So I do have notes. Like I have a PowerPoint presentation that I've used throughout the years and updated throughout the years that I'm using as my notes to go by, because it is. This is so much to remember. But federally, race, religion, national origin, color, sex, familial status, which means family status, and disability. So it's 7 as far as federal, right? Those 7. All of us fall into multiple. We all have a race. We all have a religion, or we don't have a religion. That applies. We all have a national origin. We all have a color. We all have a sex or gender. We all have a familial status. Then some people are also disabled and not disabled. So we all fall into that. Then some of the states, right, federal, like I said, these are the federal classes, but some of the states also have marital status, the source of your income, sexual orientation, ancestry, age, genetic information, gender identity or expression. So as we get to the states, it gets more intensive. So the best thing to do is, there's, again, depending on, oh my God, Lucas checked it out. And so the best thing to do is make sure that you're not only in compliance with what's required federally, but also make sure what your state has, right? The possible additional protected classes based off of your state. Some states are landlord friendly, or pro landlord, and some are pro tenant. You go to a place like California, places like Illinois, very, very heavy pro tenant, right? Which I don't understand why anybody would own rental property in California. But anyway, do you have states like here in Texas, pretty damn landlord friendly. I've never seen evictions happen so fast in my freaking life. So you have other states that are pro landlord. So when you get to those states that are usually more pro tenant, and then you have some that are pretty even. But if you start looking at those states that are pro tenant, make sure and understand, like, there's going to be additional, besides these 7 federal, on top of that 7 federal classes, protected classes, it's going to be more. Okay. So what is housing discrimination, right? Refusal to rent or sell after a bona fide offer, right? So that means, like, if you tell somebody that you'll rent to them and then you find out certain information that has to do with those protected classes, you can't renege. You know what I mean? Like, you can't renege on that after you made that agreement. You've made that agreement. Refusal to negotiate for sale or rental. Otherwise, make unavailable or deny housing. Those kind of are one and the same. Like, so you can't have a for rent sign, right? We have 2 apartments for rent, right? And then somebody walks in, you don't like the way they look, like, oh yeah, that's not available anymore. I'm sorry, right? And what they do is just kind of backtrack. So what happens is if somebody feels like they experience discrimination, housing discrimination, and they make, they go to the state and they make that complaint, what happens is they're going to send somebody in that is like their doppelganger, right? They're going to send in same age range, same color, same religion, same gender, and they're going to go in and they're going to ask that same question. It's going to be the same scenario, and they're going to see how they respond, right? And then they're going to send somebody else in that might be the polar opposite. Same situation, same scenario, and see if there's a difference in response, right? So if I send in like some middle-aged white dude and you told him that you didn't have an apartment available, and then he makes a complaint, he thinks it was done because of his race or his age, and then I send in a Hispanic male, same age, and you still have the same sign or the same advertising, and you say, oh yeah, we have that available, right? That's the kind of stuff that they look for. And I understand that a lot of people think to themselves like, man, I would never do that. If you have a big property and you have on-site management, sometimes people's biases are not conscious, right? Sometimes it's a subconscious thing. And then other times, like, people will make up their mind that certain type of residents are a headache. Like, and I'm just keeping it real. Like, some people get in that mode, like, oh my God, last time we had a person like that, they were a headache. So the next time they see a person that reminds them of that person, they'll find a reason to deny them, or they'll find a reason to make them not apply, right? Or consider not applying. Okay. So steering. Oh my God, man. What is steering? It's crazy, right? So if somebody comes in, oh yeah, I have 2 kids, 10 and 9. And it's just us, right? And you steer them towards the playground on the property, and you take them to the playground on the property. Oh yeah, like, this is good. It's right next to the playground for the kids. That's steering, right? Or if you have this person that comes in and like, oh yeah, it's just me. I'm single. I don't, it's just me. I don't have any kids. I don't plan on having kids. I don't plan on having a roommate. And you take them away from the park, right? You don't even show them anything by the park. That's steering. And that's against fair housing, right? Like, I know that sounds crazy, and I know it sounds reasonable. In my opinion, it is reasonable, right? Because if I go somewhere and I show you, and I have my kids with me, and I tell you, hey, my kids are going to be here, I would expect you to point out the benefits of my kids, right? Or you would put me in a position where things will be convenient for my kids, or my kids can enjoy it. When it comes to housing, that can be a problem, because that can be considered steering. And again, I know it sounds ridiculous, but all these things are made for a reason. And you had people experience steering, right? In a horrible way, right? And it affected them one way or another, right? It might have been in a neighborhood, right? All the black people live over here, right? So you have somebody come in this neighborhood, or hey, I'm looking in this zip code, and you have agents pushing them one way, right? So these things have merit on why they're here. Are they tricky? Yes, right? But steering is a big one, and steering often happens, and people don't even realize that they're breaking fair housing. Also, retaliation, intimidation, coercion, using any of those things to deny or encourage someone not to apply is considered discrimination, housing discrimination. Now, too, if somebody tells you how much they make, and you have in one of your criteria for them living there is, hey, you have to make 3 times the rent. If they don't meet that, then they don't meet that, right? That's not retaliation. That's not intimidation. That's not coercion. That's just telling them that they don't meet it, So you wouldn't encourage, you tell them, like, I wouldn't necessarily encourage you to apply, because you, based off of what you told me today, your income wouldn't meet that minimum, right? And that's not, that would clear you of those other things. Some other things, difference in services, difference in facilities, right? Telling somebody that, yeah, you can't use this service, right? Or your kids can't be over here, right? And I know, again, this stuff sounds crazy, but this stuff happens, right? But even advertising, when you're advertising, if you express a preference in the advertisement, right? I know that sounds crazy, right? Something simple like family friendly, that literally can be considered that can be considered discrimination, right? Around that, you would be like, hey, park, pool, open spaces. Like you can't put those groups out there like that. I know it sounds crazy, and I'm going to keep saying it sounds crazy, but these things have just happened, right? You have to think back. There was a time where on advertisement it would say no blacks and Jews. And if you're my age and you're so blessed to have grandparents around, they can remember those times, right? So don't think like this is like, where is this coming from? Like, they had this kind of stuff in advertisement, so they have to, when these laws are passed, they have to make it very clear that you can't do these things, right? And each time there's a protected class that's added, they have to let them know, like, you can't advertise this way. You can't show preference or in your advertisement, right? When we're talking about housing, okay? Disability specific provisions, right? So the biggest thing is reasonable accommodations, reasonable modifications, accessibility requirements for newer housing, right? So that is actually, this is something I'm bringing up, but that is something I'm going to do a whole nother one about. I'm going to do just a whole nother episode about that, because reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications get a lot of people in trouble. What's reasonable is up for debate, but there's some basic things that definitely should be practiced in those cases. And you might ask yourself, what type of housing is covered? Again, we focus, when I say we, me, I focus on multifamily, but anyone listening to this, again, we're all protected by this. So I do want everybody to know this, because you may not be looking at an apartment. You might be looking at other things. You might know someone who's looking at other things or experiencing this. And, after you get this information, you should let them know if they have experienced housing discrimination. Okay. I'm going to name all the places. Well, some of the places that are covered: apartments, rooms for rents, and that's with the expectations on rooms for rent, long-term motel stays, homeless shelter, transitional, sober living, college dormitories, condominiums, single-family homes, mobile homes, RV parks, campsites, and raw land. All those, practically anything that is a dwelling is covered by fair housing. Now, there are rules, there are exceptions, and I'll go through that in another video. For instance, with student housing, like there's certain things and certain times where they can discriminate, I guess, or limit or have a preference. So again, when does this apply? It applies to all those places, but pretty much every transaction covered that's related to housing, they have to adhere to these rules: management, advertising, insurance, lending, brokering loans, real estate brokers, appraisers. We've seen recently, very recently, there's been instances of appraisers appraising the value. Like, somebody might come from the same company, and one person might appraise it here, and they've changed the pictures in the house, the decor, like not the decor, like they've taken certain pictures out, and somebody else, they might have put it here. Then somebody else from that same company comes in with certain pictures and that shows certain ethnic people, those pictures away or any reference to it, and then it's appraised here. And not like 10,000 more. I'm talking about like 100,000 more on like a $300,000-$400,000 house. That's a lot of freaking money, right? So appraisers, design and construction, and security and protection. All of that stuff is covered under fair housing, and those are the people or the companies that have to adhere to it, and those are the ones that you should be paying attention to make sure they're being fair to you, the people you love, anybody you come across and So I think that'll be it for today. On the next episode, I'm going to really go into disability, because there's and that has a lot of moving parts too. for reasonable accommodations. What is considered a reasonable accommodation? Having accessible apartments, right? Some units that are accessible. Depending on where you are in new construction, they might require a certain amount of accessible apartments per building or per unit. Another big thing, and probably the most controversial, is support animals. ESA, emotional support animals. That's a big thing. We'll talk about that and go into that. So, like I said, this will be like a whole little series on fair housing, and I'll get a lot more detailed for specific classes, protected classes, an example, how you protect them. I probably too as well try and find the background of why they became a protected class and what was happening and why they are a protected class. Talk about examples of discrimination against that protected class. Again, some is obvious, but a lot of the times when fair housing rules and laws are broken, they are not done with malice intent, but they don't care if you did it on purpose. It could have been a complete accident, right? But so we'll continue this series, I guess, until as many as I need to do to kind of get it covered. But thank you guys for joining me today. Again, my name is Angelo Webb, and this is the Multifamily Man Podcast, powered by Total Wealth Academy. Have a good one.